The piercing whine of an aerial bloodsucker raped my ear, and I struck the side of my face with a fierce conviction. I found the pain worth it as I felt a minuscule squish of insect parts stick to my flesh. A satisfied single laugh spat from my mouth as I scraped what was left onto my jeans. AJ saw the incident, and with a hint of whiny girlishness proclaimed, "I know, we must have candy in our blood." She swatted at her collarbone, setting her twins a-jiggle under her tight dress, her other hand skillfully preventing a single drop to be lost from her third vodka tonic. "Jason," she groaned, "you got screwed on these candles. Citronella my fat ass." Jason grinned and sat back casually, a generous accent to his attire. "It's early, they'll come through." The half-dozen blades of flame sprouting from as many tiki torches contrasted uniquely against the night sky and illuminated our little porch congregation with fluttering ambiance. Most everyone else had retired for the evening, leaving the 5 of us old high school chums alone in Jason and Lindy's backyard. The affair had been nothing crazy. We were no longer child stars of the 90s, but now early-aged backup singers at the cusp of the 21st century. And while life had been gracious, it hadn't been magnanimous. But we were still a tight group, and all we needed for sustenance was the occasional get-together, underscored only by a constant but not overbearing alcoholic intake. We were wiser, heavier, but still prone to staying up late, chatting about old times. The cliché was ignored by all as well. Lindy gave a soft, confused moan as she rubbed the 7-month swell rising from her billowing tie-dye blouse. Jason was attentive immediately, wrapping an arm around her and firmly asking, "What is it?" "Little stinker's playing xylophone with my spleen," she said, cringing through her forced smile. "I'll call the hospital." He began to rise, but Lindy's soft, reassuring hand stopped him cold. It's fine. It'll go away in a minute." Closing her dainty eyes, she took 3 long breaths, as if ritualistically. Then she turned to her lover with the sweetest of smiles. "Blue skies." "You certain? You all good?" "I'm perfect." "Okay, drink your water," he commanded softly, handing her a large pink plastic cup, almost overflowing with ice. She sipped at it delicately, then leaned over, nestling her head against her valiant knight's chest while he ran his hand through her soft, wavy brown hair. He planted a kiss on her cheek, and she smiled warmly. AJ unsheathed her cursed blade we'd long since dubbed Moment Killer and stabbed through the air with, "Probably just trapped wind. When I had the twins, I was like a toxic warhead." But Lindy laughed good-naturedly against Jason's body and proclaimed, "Probably. Have a good doctor lined up?" "Agar." "Oh, he's fantastic," AJ beamed. "Always in the blue when you venture with a Jew." Daniel sputtered into his snifter, sending a mini hurricane through his Pendleton. He wiped at his mouth, pretending to stifle a cough. Jason and I hid grins with our drinks. "And I'm just going to say it," AJ continued. "C-section. Trust me, after the first kid, it's like the gums of a pit bull. By the third, it starts looking like something from Dr. Seuss. I suppose every group has one." "Geez, Jay." It slipped out between my lips. Some exterior force coaxed it from me, possibly a mischievous demon that passes time in his fiery purgatory by casting invisibility over better judgment. AJ pointed a chubby, nearly accusatory finger toward me and grinned. "When you have kids, you'll give up some class too, hon." Soft laughter circulated amongst the group, and even I managed to smile, though I felt my cheeks burn. Crass nature notwithstanding, I often found it hard not to admire her indifference. "Speaking of reminders," AJ suddenly said after a small burp, "tell him your wasp story." A long tangle of somewhat blonde hair fell loose from her bun and dangled before her face. I took a half-minded sip of bourbon and pretended to dust something off my dinner jacket. "Oh, it's nothing exciting." "Surrender your modesty," Daniel said in his low, baritone voice that was like a whisper, but still managed to echo across the room. He sat cross-legged in his lawn chair, molesting his chin with suave fingers and staring at me from just beneath the hood of his eyelids. "Regale us with your anecdote." Lindy had a much subtler and sweeter route past my shyness. What can I say? Even among friends, I'm the quiet one. "Tell us, Caleb," she said with her sweet smile. I took another swig, thankful for the buzz that helped overpower my hatred of attention. Well, I drove Sexy Exy over to gas up. My nickname for my 2001 Xterra. You see why I don't talk. And as I open the fuel flap, there's this wasp nest on the inside of the door. 15 wasps buzzing around. It had been more like 8, but I was never a friend to math. I wanted to douse him with unleaded, but then I thought, nah, fire hazard. Plus, look at the prices, Jason quipped to audience approval. I gave Jace the laughter I felt his interjection deserved, then continued. But I got the wiper thingy in my other hand. Well, I knew I didn't have the fuel to turn around, so I took a chance and swatted him with the wiper. 3 flew off, but the rest sputtered and danced across the asphalt, and it was easy to mop up for the sneakers. Wasn't until afterward I remembered soapy water's their kryptonite. Lucky me. Yeah, why is that, bug boy? AJ said to Daniel, drunk enough for once to listen to his entomological prowess. When he answered, it sounded as though he was explaining his child's handicap during a sports game. Water weighs down their wings. The soap clogs their breathing pores. The rubbing of his chin ceased, and he gazed into space. Smoke trailed from his cigarette and seemed to enwrap him like a serpent. Jason smirked but added nothing. I knew my story wouldn't impress him. Here was a guy who lost his virginity at age 14 in an Asian whorehouse. The mysteries of the world were old hat to an Italian boy growing up in the heartland of Philly. When he moved out here to the West Coast as a teen, he brought with him a worldly knowledge and societal apathy that designated him both Lord of the Pussies and alpha male of the dudes. I think he'd softened over the years with our group, though, especially after dating Lindy. She was a calming, vibrant presence, a conservative child of the earth, and yet she fell head over heels for Jace's stoic masculinity. And what's more incredulous was how he swooned over her. Theirs was the kind of bond that made you just as happy, not just for them, but for yourself and for life. AJ had caught the bouquet at their wedding and nearly ripped her dress, she jumped up and down so violently. We'd all been enraptured with the couple. All except Daniel. He had once gone steady with Lindy, and I'd always suspected he held something of a spiteful splinter for the husband, perhaps even the wife. But Daniel was the closed diary of a teenage girl, heart-shaped lock included. He carried a dark veil about him comprised mainly of Robert Browning and Edgar Allan Poe. He'd actually written several horror novels, all received negative to meh reviews. I think his widespread dislike for humanity was what eventually drew him to insects. From her bed made of Jace's peck, Lindy smiled warmly, as if thankful for my simplistic story. I'm not ashamed to admit that my heart fluttered a bit at the thought. I think it's clear you need to gas up more often, little buddy, Jason said to me in his big brother voice. How'd they even get in there? AJ nursed her tonic with a sex face she wasn't shy of flaunting, but she broke character long enough to croon toward Daniel. No nook is too small or cranny too thin for their impregnation, right, Danny boy? Repent and flee into the hills, for the insect shall one day conquer all. She threw her head back in dramatic mockery before shamelessly scratching her nose. Daniel remained, as always, unmoved by her teasing. He took a final drag, then extinguished his cigarette into the bowl Lindy had provided for him. Tubbo's babbling notwithstanding, AJ tossed ice at him. Again, unmoved. The base principle is accurate. Insects have existed far longer than humans, and will no doubt continue long after we are spent. There is no environment they cannot adapt to, no enemy that can outnumber them. As a wise character from an albeit forgettable TV show once said, if God exists, God is a cockroach. Heroes? Lindy asked. Clarissa explains it all, AJ stated confidently. She was thrown more than a few bemused looks. I was reading about a species in Africa, I spoke up, that lays its eggs under human skin. The larvae hatches, sucks up our nutrients, and then bores out of us. Sweetie, I'm drinking, AJ said, her face pinched in repulsion. You see I'm drinking? That does sound African, Jason said, taking a swig of his lager. Racist, Lindy sung. Continentist, Jason countered. Lindy snickered against his chest, and he kissed her forehead again. Her smile widened. Child's play, Daniel stated at me, ignoring the couple. He hammered a fresh cig from his pack, lit it, and exhaled a billowing gust of smoke into the night. I could tell you stories from the lab that would keep you up at night." "No, thank you," Lindy said. She gave her bulging belly a pat and stated, "Someone already sees to that." But my curiosity was intent on killing me. "Spill." I felt Lindy's stare from across the porch. "Just one," I beseeched her with a pleading gaze. Her eyes closed in an aggravated sigh, but she smiled softly. Daniel's eyes droned into the night with a callous attentiveness. He took his time collecting his thoughts, sorting through memories. I knew he would choose when to begin. He would not be coaxed. "Last year, our lab was called by the hospital. Said they had a new patient, and the doctors were out of their field. Amused, more than anything else, the suits sent over myself and 2 other technicians. The cops had brought in a vagrant living under the Klamath overpass, malnourished, pale as a sheet, and soaked through with blood." He paused to take another drag. Exhaling the smoke, he seemed to be lost in memories, or perhaps the nicotine euphoria. "She'd sliced open her arms and one of her legs. Each wound was writhing with at least 50 mealworms." All our faces twisted and contorted as the putridity of his words hung in the night air like a stench. AJ made a sound like a choking walrus and scratched feverishly at her bare skin. Only Jason looked unperturbed. He just sat there, smirking in Daniel's direction. In retrospect, I don't think he quite believed Lindy's old lover. One of the younger techs asked her about them. Her bright eyes and toothless smile never wavered as she squealed, "They're my friends. We's always together. Family." She died within the hour. At the autopsy, she was still moving. Her skin was alive with bumps and ripples. When they cut back the skin, we found at least 20 darkling beetles crawling amidst her muscles and organs. "Jesus," AJ breathed, though she was agape at the story. Around our town, it was common knowledge that the beetles were the adult stage of the mealworm. You could find the little guys all over the place, mostly under rocks and logs. They were so plain, nondescript, it was hard to give them a second glance. Then some of those worms had to have been inside her for a little under a year, Daniel stated. My stomach gave a lurch, and I set my glass down. "Thanks," AJ said, bubbling with spite. "I guess I'm never eating again." My mind began racing as a long line of synapses were triggered, and by the end of the road, a deeply buried memory surfaced. My grandpa once knew a guy who cut his lip as he was licking an envelope. The cut only became more painful over the next 2 weeks. Eventually, his whole lip swelled like a balloon. Apparently, something had laid its eggs in the envelope box, because the guy's doctor pulled out 3 pea-sized... "Caleb!" came Lindy's raised voice. The look she gave me bore a hole into my heart that will take some time to heal. Again, she rubbed uncomfortably at her swollen belly. "This is also why I don't talk." "Yes," Daniel said, somewhat excited now, which for him translated to mildly interested. His attention seemed focused on me now, as the opener of this worm can. "You see, it doesn't take much. Some insects' eggs are the size of a pinhead, and many larvae can feed off of anything. Flesh tissue, even blood. Interbreeding only opens the doors to literally infinite possibilities." "Interbreeding?" I couldn't help it. From my peripherals, I saw Jason rub his temples. "Natural hybridization is more common than most think. In Lepidoptera alone, it occurs almost a quarter of the time. But in the lab, interbreeding is akin to playing God. These past 6 months, I've crossbred thousands of species, many of which were thought to be incompatible. I swear on all that is holy, the results have been spectacular." He spat the last word through nearly clenched teeth, a string of saliva straddling his lower lip. "Okay, that's enough for this, Mama." Lindy took her time, rising to her feet with Jason's help. "Junior's at it again." Her face contorted with a pained grimace, and one hand almost squeezed at her belly. "Babe, I have the number," Jason offered. She shook her head vehemently, the grimace slowly fading in the process. She bent forward and kissed him. "Stay here, talk, drink, celebrate. I just need to rest, I promise." Jason looked dubious, but he complied with a loving smile. He kissed her belly, running a hand against it soothingly. "Give your mother a break," he spoke firmly to the bump. Lindy smiled, kissed him again, then told us all good night. As she passed Daniel, she ruffled his hair so that the black tufts resembled a bird's nest. Though he looked unamused, he calmly smoothed it back so it formed his iconic widow's peak with the gray roots. "Look at you," AJ smiled at Jason after Lindy closed the sliding glass door behind her. "Playboy on campus turned husband of the millennium in only a few short installments. So jealous." "Do you have a name yet?" I asked. "Angela for a girl, Franco for a boy. Lynn was pushing Ottaviano for a while, but I thought we might as well name him Luigi and dress him in green overalls." The laughter was unanimous. Even Daniel managed to smirk. "You've built a great foundation," I said, perhaps sounding a little gushy, but that was unavoidable. "It's only going to get better." "An easy journey when both travelers care," came Daniel's bland interjection. An unsteady silence fell upon the backyard. The look Jason gave the entomologist was a blank page, perhaps the tiniest footnote of disappointment scribbled at the bottom. Daniel did not meet his gaze. His was focused far too much on the darkness at the back of the yard. "Well, hey, here's to a happy future." I raised my glass perhaps a bit too enthusiastically in my desperation to get this train back on track. Jason managed a crooked smirk. He lifted his mug of ale. "To love." Everyone but Daniel joined in the toast. The gathering came to a close half an hour later. Jason saw us to the front door, gave AJ a hug and me a fist bump. To Daniel he gave a half nod. Daniel returned it, half-assed. "Buonanotte," he called in the best Dean Martin he could conjure as we walked down the drive. AJ wobbled a bit, but I steered her to Sexy Exy's shotgun. "Need a ride, Dan?" I asked. Even in the dim light of the street lamp, I could vividly make out AJ's livid stare. But Daniel was already walking down the empty street. He gave a wave of his arm and turned back briefly to say, "I want you to know, Caleb, you were my favorite." He walked off into the darkness, slowly, the echo of his footfalls fading into the distance. For a while, I saw his silhouette against the streetlights further down. Then he was gone. AJ made a psh sound and wrenched the door open so fast she nearly broke her nose. Guy keeps getting weirder. We never saw Daniel again. The next morning, I drove back to Lindy and Jason's. He and I usually go for a jog Sunday mornings, but he hadn't been answering his phone. I tried giving Lindy a ring. Same story. As I walked up the drive, I could see Jason sitting on their front stoop. The closer I got, the more strange a picture was painted before me. Jason was clad in his jockey shorts and puffing away at a cigarette. Lindy had made him quit soon after they'd gotten married, but I knew he kept a pack under a floorboard in the shed that he would dip into whenever he was overly stressed or pissed. I knew Lindy was aware of this. I also knew he had only borrowed from the stash thrice in the past 2 years, twice for stress, once for pissed. The last detail I noticed was the pack lying next to him, empty and crumpled. His eyes shot over to me as I approached. They were red and glazed. Jace? He leapt at me, grabbing me by the collar and slammed me against the house. "Did you know?" he barked, the dialect of a scratchy throat emphasizing his words most vividly. "Did you know?" "Know what?" I cried. I'd nearly pissed myself as I struck the wall. I'd seen Jason this angry, but never had his rage been directed my way. His breath was hot against my face, and his blood-red eyes appeared ready to rape my soul. They vibrated as if the rage would erupt from his skull like lava. After that, something more frightening happened. His eyes calmed, his lower lip trembled, and he began to cry. He collapsed back onto the stoop and rocked his head back and forth in his hands, weeping. I don't know how he did it. How did he do it? When? Why? Why? He suddenly screamed, practically imploring the heavens above. I know why, but how? When? He buried his mouth into his knuckles and rocked back and forth, making the most animal-like moaning. I could only watch. spellbound as the coolest-headed man I'd ever known shriveled up into a mewling child. Then I noticed his skin. He was covered with small but very red dots. They peppered his entire body. Then I noticed the blood. There wasn't much of it, but what there was splattered across his shoulder, chest, and right knee. I could make out no cuts or open wounds. Their front door was open. "Lind!" I called into the house. "Lindy!" As I entered, I heard a high-pitched, throaty whine from the stoop, followed by what sounded like, "So many of them." I can't explain what drove me through the house. Call it intuition, call it mindless curiosity. All I know is that I wish I'd overcome whatever force hypnotized me and pressured me into the living room, down the hall, and into the bedroom. Jesus God. I told myself not to scream. I was afraid I'd draw their attention. But scream I did. I vomited as well, the harsh, bitter bile that stings your mouth on the way out. I have vague recollections of grabbing onto the doorframe to keep myself upright. Lindy lay upon the bed, her glassy eyes staring up at the ceiling, her auburn hair in a tumbled mess, her mouth partly open. The remnants of a nightie clinging to her chest, while the savagely torn rag splayed open like fingers to reveal her no longer round belly. The skin was split open, and a gaping maw of red revealed a living, pulsating mass of putrescence that squirmed and writhed about her entrails and leaked outward upon her flesh and upon the soaking red mattress. Her skin stretched and twitched as large bumps navigated under her skin until wiggling out of pre-chewed holes. One crawled out her mouth. Several wiggled free from the crotch in her panties. Next to her, another writhing mound of the shiny black things shimmered and wobbled. A small red arm poked through the living mass, and enough flesh had been stripped to reveal the whiteness of bone. A collection of the creatures scattered and shifted enough to briefly reveal a tiny, misshapen face, frozen in a deathly scream, before it was swallowed up once again by the wiggling heap of unholiness. Several strays from the horrific swarm plopped onto the carpet and began inching their way toward me. They were like plump sausages, each the length of my index finger. They crawled along like caterpillars, the sections of their black bodies extending like an accordion, only they did so with a vigorous energy. On the one closest to me I could make out two tiny mandibles, pinching together with a ravenous ferocity as it neared my feet. My face ached, twisted in a rictus of hatred and fear, as I brought the judgment of my running shoe slamming down onto the thing. It let out a tiny screech, and a small pop sent a splatter of green, vibrant slime across the rug. A soft, slurping noise drew my attention back to Lindy's horribly mutilated midsection. The writhing creature scattered, her organs pushed outward to flop onto the bed, and from the savage heap of red flesh and torn muscle, a larger, white creature rose, like a balloon inflating. A sickening rip, like wet cardboard being ripped apart, echoed in the small room as the thing burst open and a hairy, segmented leg the length of my hand emerged, followed by another, and another, until finally one pushed aside the collapsing pupae to reveal a tiny head with bulbous eyes and two pincers that separated to reveal a minute but needle-rimmed mouth, spewing strings of saliva to let forth a piercing screech that sent a chorus of paralyzing ripples down my spine. I slammed the door shut just as a great weight was thrown into it. Angry hisses and shrieks like nails on a chalkboard chorused a furious crescendo of thuds against the door, like a giant hand tapping rapidly on wood. The ripples in my spine turned to itchy twitches, and I scratched and clawed at my body like a spastic child, screaming. I felt blood. I scratched harder. I was crying. Jason burned the house to the ground. He stood there, watching the flames eat away the wood and plaster, the shriveling walls blacken and crumble in a shower of sparks. My eyes never left him. His body arched, his limbs stiff, his head lowered, his eyes ablaze with the orange flames. His hand never let go of the lighter. And rising steadily from the flames came the noise, as if singing backup for the snaps and crackles. A chorus of faint screeches, barely audible, but flesh-crawling none the less. Their chaotic caroling died out shortly before the flames did. Smoke rose in billowing plumes that wafted upward to block out the sun. Jason remained unmoved, staring at the rubble with dead eyes. There was, after all, no reason for this foundation anymore.